So I'm gonna review a case I did a couple of days ago on a kid that broke his front tooth, who didn't want to go to school anymore because he was embarrassed because it was in his smile zone. And we're gonna talk about why we decided to do a crown on the tooth, the procedure involved, and some other steps to give you guys a better understanding of what the crown process involves and some of the things that dentists think about when we design these crowns. So a little bit of backstory about this case. This tooth was treated a couple years ago because he got in an accident where he chipped his front tooth, and the tooth has a root canal, and the tooth was treated with a composite resin restoration, otherwise known as tooth bonding. And the dentist did a really good job with the bonding. It matched his teeth, it looked really good, but unfortunately, when he broke it a second time, more of the tooth came off, and the tooth was left in a very vulnerable, weakened state. And when I see a tooth that's really short, that's already been treated with dental bonding, which has failed, and the tooth is already weakened with a root canal, then one of my top options is going to be a dental crown. And I know crowns can be considered aggressive, especially on the front teeth, but when you have a case like this, crowns are definitely something that you have to bring up to your patient. Now, before I start drilling on the teeth, I like to prepare a mock-up. So as you can see in the video, I use a dental composite resin to build up the tooth, and the whole point of this process is to build it up, give it natural contours, make it look like the adjacent tooth, show the patient with the mirror if this is how his tooth looked like before, whether he had a little diastema or space between the teeth, whether he didn't, and whether this is kind of the final outcome that he wants to have. I take a few photos, and I can use those photos to show my dental laboratory that this is the design that our patient wants. Now, after that's all done, we really have to think about how we're gonna design this crown. Unfortunately, he has so little tooth structure, and when I see a patient with very little tooth structure, I'm afraid that if I design a crown, it's simply gonna break off, just like his older filling broke off within a matter of years. So when I'm designing this crown, I wanna create margins that go under the gum. So we call that subgingival margins. And I want to grab onto as much healthy tooth structure as possible. The more healthy tooth structure that I can grab onto, the more likely the crown is going to be stable, long lasting, and it's not just going to pop off. And that's a critical factor when we have these trauma patients or people that have an accident where they break their teeth in a significant way, in a big way. We need to think about the design in a way that we can make a restoration that will last the patient for a very long time. So as you can see here, I'm preparing the tooth with that mock-up in place. I'm creating really nice delineated margins, and eventually I get to a point where I can take off that mock-up and I see his natural tooth as it is. And obviously in this video, you can see how short the tooth is, so that was the major challenge, is to make sure that when I'm designing my crown preparation, that I have nice parallel axial walls. That means that the sides of the prep are relatively parallel. Typically, we like it to be tapered a little bit, but the more parallel you have it, the more likely that that crown is going to be retentive mechanically. Now in dentistry, especially if we're talking about biomimetic dentistry, we can now rely on bonding, strong bonding, to grab onto the tooth, and we don't need to worry as much about mechanical retention. But in these cases, I still want all the help I can get to make sure I deliver a long-lasting crown for his broken tooth. Another thing that you may not know about is the purpose of a cord. Cord packing in dentistry allows us to retract the gums out of the way so that we can prepare the margins subgingivally without traumatizing too much of the gum tissue. Some dentists like to do this, some dentists don't, but just know that if you're ever at the office and you get a crown done and the dentist is talking to you about packing a cord, that is the reason why they do it. They do it to either retract the gums to prepare margins subgingivally, or they do it to move the gums out of the way so that you can have clear delineated margin and you can take a more accurate impression for the dental laboratory. Up above me, you can see the cord packing. We go around the entire tooth. We try to measure it as accurately as possible, but if we have too much cord, we end up cutting it and we tuck it under the gum. After the cord packing is done, the dentist will either modify their margins or they will go on to the impression step. You guys have to remember that when we're designing a crown, we need a minimal thickness to allow us to have enough material that the crown doesn't fracture on us. And that's why we prepare all around the tooth, and we do it in a way that's conservative so that we hit that minimal thickness without over preparing the tooth. Now, Obviously in this case, the tooth was already broken in half, so there was already a lot of reduction on the top part of the tooth, but around the tooth we had to reduce more, and also towards the back side of the tooth we had to reduce, so that the palatal part of the tooth, meaning the part of the tooth towards the back, has enough clearance so that we have a good thickness of material. And finally, we take an impression and we make a provisional. For the impression, we use polyvinyl siloxane material. There's a light body material and a heavy body material. This material goes onto your tooth, you bite down on it, over time it hardens, and it accurately gets an impression that we can send to a dental laboratory to make a crown. Nowadays, there is digital technology where you can scan the tooth and you can digitally send a file to the laboratory to make a crown, and I'm actually in the process of buying one in the future, so I'll make a couple videos on that soon. But for this case, we went with the traditional PVS, we got a really nice accurate impression, and then we went on to the provisional. Remember that we spent so much time on that mock-up, and we have this impression of that mock-up, so the provisional actually turned out really well. We tried to use a shade that was as accurate as possible to his teeth. We put it on the preparation, we wait a little bit of time, we take it out, and we're left with a temporary crown. Now, if you leave it alone like this, there's a lot of flash, his gums will get irritated, so obviously we take off the provisional, we use a variety of instruments to clean up the flash, to make sure that it's well adapted to the margins of the tooth, and then we cement it on with a temporary cement material. Now, I told my patient, who's a bit younger, that he needs to be extra careful with biting on hard food items, with tearing things with his teeth, anything like that, because the tooth was already so short to begin with, and I was scared that he's gonna lose his temporary crown over the weekend. So right now it's Memorial Day weekend, and I'm hoping that his crown is doing good. Thank you again for letting me use this footage for this channel. So we'll see if the temporary crown has lasted him through the weekend, and hopefully lasts him for the next 2 weeks until he gets his final crown delivered. With temporary crowns, that is one thing to consider. You have to be careful with chewy, sticky food that can grab onto the temporary crown and it can take it off. The idea of the temporary crown is to be a space maintainer, or basically hold the space so that the teeth adjacent to the crown preparation don't shift by millimeters inward, and then when you get the final crown back, you can't put it on because it doesn't fit well, so you want to maintain that space. It also serves a purpose of making sure that patients that don't have a root canal treated teeth, they're not experiencing sensitivity while they wait for that final crown, and also gives us an idea of whether the patient likes the shape and contour, whether this design is something he wants, whether he wants to keep the diastema or space in between his teeth open, or whether he wants to try to close it with the crown, and things like that. So temporary crowns are nice in some cases. Again, with digital technology, nowadays they do have something called CAD/CAM, where a machine can mill out a crown. Typically, when you're milling out a crown, you have to prepare the tooth a little bit more aggressively than if you were not to mill out a crown. So that's kind of a con of using same-day crowns, but it is the future, and I do imagine that these millers are gonna get more accurate and we'll be able to do conservative preparations and mill out crowns same day, and it's gonna have a really nice result. So either way, that's kind of a case review for you guys. I'm trying to get into filming procedures, but it's so difficult to do because the camera quality isn't where I want it, and I'm looking to maybe mount a camera on the ceiling, a really high quality camera on the ceiling, so that I can film procedures. They do have a way to do it with an endodontic microscope, but using a microscope in dentistry is very difficult and complicated, so I'm still trying to figure out a way to give you guys really good quality content, educational content that you guys can use next time you're at your dentist. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and you guys have a great day.